The acrid scent of burnt earth and distant gunpowder hung heavy in the air, a familiar perfume in this ravaged land. Sergeant Miles Corbin, his face a canvas of dust and fatigue, motioned his squad forward with a gloved hand. Their boots crunched against the skeletal remains of what was once a bustling village, now a ghost town, punctuated by twisted metal and shattered masonry. Sunlight, weak and diffused by the ever-present haze, cast long, distorted shadows before them. They were on a routine patrol, a grim march through a sector supposedly cleared, a desolate expanse where life seemed to have no purchase. Suddenly, a faint sound, barely discernible above the rhythmic thud of their own footsteps and the distant rumble of artillery, snagged Miles' attention. He paused, holding up a fist, instantly silencing the squad. Every man froze, weapons raised, eyes scanning the desolate surroundings. The wind, a mournful whisper through broken structures, seemed to carry it closer. It was a soft, almost imperceptible whimper, a sound utterly out of place in this tableau of destruction. Miles frowned, his brow furrowing deeper. This area was supposed to be barren, cleared of any living thing, certainly nothing that would make such a vulnerable sound. His gaze swept across the wasteland until it landed on a gaping wound in the earth, a fresh crater, perhaps a recent shell strike. Its edges were jagged, still raw, and from its dark maw, the whimper seemed to emanate with a renewed, albeit still tenuous, persistence. It was faint, yes, but undeniably present, a tiny, fragile plea in the midst of overwhelming silence. Miles, a Canadian soldier whose years of service had etched lines of experience around his eyes and a quiet weariness into his posture, felt a familiar tug. He'd seen too much, lost too many, to ignore such a sound. The weight of past losses, the ghosts of comrades who had fallen on similar patrols, pressed down on him with a familiar ache. He was a leader, strong and capable, but the brutality of war had taught him that even in the most desolate places, life could cling on, often in the most unexpected and vulnerable forms. "Did you hear that?" he murmured, low and clipped, to Corporal Jensen, who was positioned to his left, his young face taut with controlled tension. Jensen nodded, his eyes wide, fixed on the crater. "Sounded like a cry, Sarge. Small. A cry." The word resonated with Miles. In this theater of war, every sound was dissected, analyzed for threat. But this was different. This wasn't the metallic clang of a booby trap, nor the sharp crack of a sniper's rifle. It was something softer, something that touched a nerve that war usually numbed. The instinct to investigate, to understand the source of such a fragile noise in such a hostile environment, was immediate. It wasn't about strategic advantage or tactical maneuver. It was a deeper, more human impulse. The whimper from the crater, faint as it was, sparked an intense curiosity, laced with an immediate, gnawing concern. This sector, according to their intelligence, was a forgotten quadrant, devoid of civilian life, cleared of any opposing forces for weeks. Yet, there it was, a sound that defied their maps and their intel. "Stay alert, men," Miles ordered, his voice barely above a whisper, yet carrying the unmistakable authority of command. "Jensen, you and Miller flank left. Rodriguez, with me, flank right. Keep your eyes peeled. 360-degree coverage. I want to know what that is." His words were calm, professional, masking the slight unease that had settled in his gut. Experience had taught him that the unexpected was often the most dangerous. A whimper could be a trap, a lure. Though the simplicity of the sound suggested otherwise, it felt too genuine, too piteous to be a calculated deception. Yet, caution was paramount. Every shadow held a potential threat, every broken window a possible sniper's nest. The squad moved with practiced efficiency, their movements fluid and silent, becoming extensions of the shattered landscape. Each man knew his role, knew the drill. The crater, a black moor in the earth, seemed to draw them in, an irresistible pull generated by that tiny, persistent sound. Miles's hand instinctively went to the rifle slung across his chest, his grip firm. He was a soldier, trained to fight, to survive, to protect his men. But beneath the layers of training and hardened resolve, there was a core belief in his humanity, a spark that refused to be extinguished by the pervasive darkness of war. That whimper, echoing from the depths of the crater, was poking at that spark, demanding attention. It felt like a direct challenge to the desolation around them, a stubborn refusal to yield to complete hopelessness. What could possibly be down there, alone and vulnerable, in such a place? The question hung in the air, unanswered, propelling them forward, drawing them irrevocably towards the epicenter of the mysterious sound. The orders they had received were clear: patrol, observe, report. They contained no provisions for investigating faint cries from desolate craters. Yet, the sound itself had become an unspoken amendment to their mission, a compelling call to action that transcended their official mandate. Before we dive deeper into this incredible discovery, please hit that subscribe button and join our community for more compelling stories. The whimper, thin and fragile, pulsed through the dust-laden air, pulling Sergeant Miles Corbin's attention like an invisible thread. It was an anomaly, a sound that didn't belong in this desolate, war-scarred landscape. The crater, a recent scar on the Earth's face, yawned before them, its edges jagged, an open maw swallowing the light. Each man in his squad, hardened by months of relentless patrols and sudden skirmishes, felt the prickle of unease. This wasn't the metallic clang of shrapnel or the distant crack of a rifle. This was something softer, more vulnerable, and therefore infinitely more dangerous in its appeal. "Hold positions," Miles ordered, his voice a low rumble, instantly cutting through the whispers that had begun to circulate among his men. "Perimeter check. Eyes open, lads. Could be anything." He knew the risks. Every fiber of his being, every instinct honed by years of combat, screamed caution. A whimper could be bait, a trap laid by an unseen enemy designed to draw in the unwary. This ground, churned and scarred, was a canvas of deception. Booby traps were a constant threat, their silent menace more terrifying than an overt attack. The crater itself, deep and shadowy, was an unknown quantity, a blind spot in an environment where visibility could mean the difference between life and death. Corporal Davies, ever the pragmatist, cleared his throat. "Sergeant, we're out of our designated patrol route. Command won't be pleased if we go off script for a sound." His words hung in the air, echoing the dilemma that warred within Miles. Their mission was clear: patrol Sector Gamma, identify residual insurgent activity, and report. A whimpering sound was not on the mission parameters. Yet, the sound persisted, a faint, rhythmic plea that tugged at something deeper than protocol. It was the sound of life, perhaps, a life in distress, and that, for Miles, was a call that was hard to ignore, even in this brutal theater of conflict. "I hear you, Davies," Miles replied, his gaze fixed on the crater's rim. "But we're also not leaving a potential casualty behind, not until we know what it is." He made his decision with the quiet certainty of a man who had faced impossible choices before. The moral imperative, a fragile flame in the constant tempest of war, flickered to life. How could they walk away, knowing they might have abandoned someone or something that needed help? The internal debate was swift, decisive. The risks were undeniable, but so was the human cost of turning a blind eye. "Miller, take point on the north side. Keep your eyes on those ruins," Miles directed, pointing towards the skeletal remains of a building on the horizon. "Peterson, cover south. Davies, with me. Keep a safe distance. Provide cover. If anything moves, you light it up." His men moved with practiced efficiency, their rifles raised, eyes scanning the broken terrain. The silence that followed his orders was heavy, punctuated only by the distant caw of a bird and the relentless, almost hypnotic whimper from below. Miles approached the crater's edge, his boots crunching on loose rubble. He knelt, peering into the gloom. The sides were steep, crumbling earth and jagged rocks forming a treacherous descent. The air thick with the smell of damp earth and something metallic, a lingering scent of recent destruction. The whimpering was undeniably clearer now, a fragile, desperate sound that seemed to vibrate in his chest. It was small, whatever it was. Too small for a man, unless severely injured, almost certainly not a threat in itself, but the circumstances surrounding it remained opaque and full of menace. He unsheathed his combat knife, its blade a cold glint in the overcast light. He strapped his rifle across his back, ensuring it was accessible, but wouldn't impede his climb. "I'm going down," he announced, his voice low and firm, leaving no room for argument. Davies started to protest, but Miles cut him off with a look. "Someone needs to know, and it's going to be me." He knew his responsibility as a sergeant went beyond simply leading. It extended to making the hard calls, to taking on the risks that he wouldn't ask his men to shoulder alone. He began his descent, testing each foothold before committing his weight. Loose earth rained down, a soft patter against the crater floor. His senses were on high alert, ears straining for any sound beyond the whimpering, eyes scanning every shadow, every crevice. The war zone was a living, breathing entity, constantly shifting, constantly threatening. Every shadow held a potential enemy, every overturned rock a possible explosive. The cold metal of his knife felt reassuring in his hand, a tangible connection to his training, to his duty. The whimpering continued, a steady, mournful testament to an unknown plight, drawing him deeper into the heart of the crater, deeper into the unknown. He moved carefully, deliberately, a solitary figure against the backdrop of a broken world, compelled forward by a sound that defied the logic of war. His mission had taken an unexpected turn, guided by a faint, desperate cry for help. The descent into the crater was slow, agonizing, and fraught with peril. Every handhold Miles gripped felt precarious. Every step on the loose scree threatened to send him tumbling further into the abyss. The air grew colder, heavy with damp earth, and the metallic tang of something else he couldn't quite place. His boots dislodged small stones that clattered down into the darkness below, the sounds swallowed by the profound silence of the crater's depths. Above him, the faint light of the world seemed to shrink, reduced to a distant, indifferent glow. He felt utterly alone, a solitary figure venturing into the unknown, driven only by that persistent, fragile whimper that now seemed to pull at something deep within his own weary soul. He activated the small tactical light on his helmet, its beam cutting a stark path through the gloom. The crater floor, when he finally reached it, was uneven, a landscape of jagged rocks and muddy puddles reflecting the weak light like shards of broken glass. The whimper was closer now, clearer, a high-pitched, desperate sound that pierced through the residual tension of his descent. It wasn't human, he realized with a jolt that was half relief, half confusion. He had prepared himself for the worst, for a wounded comrade, or perhaps a civilian caught in the crossfire, but this sound was distinctly animal. He moved cautiously, weapon still at the ready, his eyes scanning the immediate vicinity. He noticed a slight tremor in a cluster of jagged rocks, a barely perceptible movement that drew his attention. As he approached, his tactical light illuminating the small space, he saw it. Tucked away in a shallow crevice, shivering violently, was a tiny creature. It was a puppy, no older than a few weeks, its fur matted with dirt and what looked like dried blood, its eyes wide with a mixture of fear and pain. Its small body was a bag of bones, pathetically thin, and it whimpered again, a thin, heart-wrenching sound that tore through Miles's hardened exterior. He holstered his weapon, his hands moving automatically, gently. He knelt beside the puppy, his large calloused fingers extending slowly. It didn't recoil. Too weak, too resigned. As he reached out, he noticed something around its neck. It wasn't just a collar. It was an old leather strap, worn and frayed almost to the point of breaking. But it wasn't the material that caught his eye. It was what was attached to it. Not a tag with a name, but a small, crudely carved wooden disc, no bigger than his thumb. He carefully lifted the puppy, cradling its fragile body in his hands. It was impossibly light, barely substantial, yet a spark of warmth radiated from it. He examined the wooden disc. On one side, etched with painstaking care, was a symbol he didn't recognize. It wasn't a military insignia, nor any common cultural emblem he'd encountered in the region. It looked like a stylized bird, perhaps a raptor, with wings outstretched, but its body seemed to form a letter or a number. It was abstract, yet strangely compelling. On the reverse side, faded but still discernible, were a few scratched lines, seemingly random, a series of short, deliberate marks that resembled a rudimentary map or a sequence of coordinates. A sudden, chilling realization washed over him. This wasn't merely an abandoned animal. This puppy, this fragile bundle of life, was carrying something. The whimper, which he had initially dismissed as simple animal distress, now resonated with a deeper, more profound meaning. It wasn't just a plea for survival from a lost creature. It felt like a cry for help from something far larger, far more significant. The collar, this tiny, unassuming piece of wood, suddenly transformed from a curiosity into a cryptic message, a silent, desperate beacon in the heart of a war zone. His heart began to pound with a different kind of urgency. This wasn't an ordinary patrol. This wasn't just about securing an area or eliminating a threat. This was about something else entirely, something unexpected and deeply personal. He looked at the puppy again, its small eyes now fixed on his, a fragile flicker of trust replacing the fear. This innocent creature, barely clinging to life, had been sent, or perhaps simply carried, a secret that had fallen into his lap, literally, in the most unlikely of places. The whimper had led him to this small, undeniable twist of fate that suddenly redefined everything he thought he knew about this mission. The silence of the crater no longer felt empty. It felt pregnant with unspoken words, with the weight of this newfound discovery. Miles knew, with an unsettling certainty, that his orders, the very parameters of his deployment, had just been irrevocably altered. This small, struggling life, and the silent message it carried, demanded more than he had initially been prepared to give. The war, with its brutal logic and clear directives, had suddenly veered into uncharted territory, guided by the whimpering plea of a forgotten puppy and a cryptic symbol carved into a piece of wood. He carefully wrapped the shivering puppy inside his jacket, feeling the faint beat of its tiny heart against his chest. He turned his gaze back to the faint light above, to the waiting world, knowing he was bringing more than just himself back from the depths. He was bringing a mystery, a burden, and perhaps a new path. Miles began his ascent. The puppy nestled securely against his chest, its tiny body trembling slightly but now silent. Each careful step up the unstable slope was laden not just with his own weight and gear, but with the profound implication of the small wooden charm. Reaching the rim, he was met by the anxious faces of his squad. Corporal Davies immediately extended a hand, helping Miles over the last tricky section. As Miles emerged, mud-streaked and somber, the men's eyes fell upon the bundle in his arms. A collective gasp, then murmurs of surprise rippled through the group. They had expected a casualty, perhaps some obscure enemy device, but certainly not a whimpering, half-starved animal. Sergeant Miller, ever the pragmatist, was the first to speak. "A dog, Shah? Is that what you found down there?" His tone held a mixture of disbelief and genuine concern, the question hanging heavy in the tense air. Miles, without speaking, carefully extracted the puppy, presenting it to the squad. The little creature blinked at the sudden light, its ears flattened, still radiating a fragile vulnerability that instantly softened even the most hardened expressions. Then, Miles drew out the small wooden disc, holding it for all to see. "It's not just the dog," he stated, his voice low but firm. "It's this." The men clustered closer, their professional demeanor momentarily replaced by a shared curiosity. The mysterious symbol, the stylized bird or raptor with its abstract body, passed from hand to hand. Davies, who had a knack for languages and local dialects from his intelligence training, squinted at the faded markings on the reverse. "Looks like some kind of old script, Sarge," he mused, tracing the lines with a gloved finger. "Or maybe just random scratches. Definitely not anything I recognize from our intel briefings." Specialist Chen, the squad's communications expert, pulled out a small tactical light, shining it on the charm. "The etching is precise, though," he observed. "Someone took a lot of care with this. It's not just a child's doodle." The initial surprise soon morphed into a more serious contemplation. The war had taught them to be suspicious of anything out of place, and a puppy carrying a cryptic message in a crater definitely qualified. Was it a trap? A diversion? A desperate plea? Miles could see the questions forming in their eyes. "We secure the perimeter," he ordered, his voice regaining its usual command. "And then we examine this collar. Every detail. Chen, see if you can get a better photo. Maybe even a rudimentary scan of the carvings. Miller, assess the puppy's condition. We need to keep it alive if it's connected to whatever this means." The immediate aftermath was a flurry of controlled activity. The landscape, once merely a backdrop for their patrol, now felt charged with a new, unseen significance. The wind, which had been an indifferent whisper, seemed to carry a weight of hidden messages. The distant echoes of gunfire, a constant companion in this besieged land, now sounded less like a generic threat and more like a specific, imminent danger to whoever or whatever was connected to the puppy's message. Miles watched as Miller carefully cradled the puppy, gently checking its paws and ribcage, offering a few drops of water from his canteen. The hardened soldier, who had seen unimaginable horrors, now spoke in soft, soothing tones to the frightened animal. This unexpected intersection of brutal reality and fragile innocence created a palpable shift in the squad's morale. The grim duty they were accustomed to was suddenly infused with a new, strange purpose. It was a flicker of hope, a stark reminder of the humanity they were fighting to protect, even in the bleakest of circumstances. Yet, with that hope came a heavy sense of responsibility. This wasn't merely a rescue mission for a lost animal. It was an obligation to decipher a hidden plea, to uncover a secret that someone had gone to extraordinary lengths to convey. Miles retrieved the collar from Davies, his thumb brushing over the carved bird, then the series of faint lines. The message was initially unclear, enigmatic, a puzzle waiting to be solved. Was it a location? A warning? A name? The weight of it felt immense, far heavier than its minuscule size. He knew, instinctively, that this small, weathered piece of wood held the key to something far greater than themselves, something that could profoundly alter the course of their mission, and perhaps even their lives. He recalled the chilling realization he'd had in the crater. The whimper wasn't just animal distress. It was a cry for help, a desperate signal from a hidden world, carried by an innocent, unsuspecting messenger. The discovery ignited a powerful emotional paradox within the war-hardened soldiers. It was easy to grow numb to suffering in a war zone, to compartmentalize the endless tragedies. But this small, vulnerable puppy, carrying a silent, urgent message, pierced through that hardened shell. It demanded empathy, not just professional detachment. It tapped into something elemental, a primal instinct to protect the innocent, to respond to a silent plea. "We need to get this back to base," Miles finally declared, his eyes sweeping across his squad, each man now gazing at the puppy with a new, profound intensity. We need to analyze this collar. Every single mark. The initial skepticism had faded, replaced by a shared sense of intrigue and a quiet, unspoken understanding that their objective had fundamentally shifted. Their orders had been to patrol, to observe, to maintain the fragile peace. Now, those orders felt insufficient, almost irrelevant, in the face of this silent, desperate plea. This was no longer just about their mission. It was about the unknown story woven into the very fibers of that small wooden disc, a story that now, whether they liked it or not, had become inextricably linked to their own. The responsibility was immense, the task daunting, but the moral imperative was clear. They had found the puppy, and with it, they had found a new, compelling reason to look beyond the immediate battle lines. Miles emerged from the crater's maw, the small bundle cradled securely against his chest, its faint warmth a startling contrast to the cold air. His men, poised and ready, initially registered surprise, then a flicker of confusion as they saw the puppy. Corporal Jenkins, ever the pragmatist, was the first to speak, a question forming on his lips. Miles cut him off with a raised hand, his gaze sweeping over the squad, a silent command in his eyes. "Perimeter secure?" he asked, his voice low, deliberately calm, masking the tremor of anticipation that hummed beneath his skin. Affirmative nods met his question. He moved towards the makeshift command post, a tarp draped over some fallen debris, and gently placed the puppy on a folded blanket. Its little nose twitched, and a soft sigh escaped its lips as if finding momentary peace. The wooden disc, still attached to its collar, seemed to draw all their attention. "This isn't just about a lost animal," Miles began, his voice now imbued with a serious undertone that instantly silenced any lingering curiosity about the pup. He carefully detached the small wooden disc, holding it up for the others to see, turning it slowly to reveal both sides. Sergeant Davies, the squad's communications specialist, peered closer, his brow furrowed in concentration. "That symbol, it's not in any military cipher I know, Sarge, and those scratches could be anything. A child's drawing, maybe? Or a map," Miles countered, tracing the faint lines with his finger. "Or coordinates, or a pattern that represents something else entirely." He unfolded a topographical map of the region, spreading it flat on the ground. "Let's assume for a moment that this isn't random, that someone, desperate enough to send a puppy into a war zone, used this as a message." He knelt, the team gathering around him, their collective focus now riveted on the unassuming piece of wood. The process of investigation and deciphering began with an almost academic intensity. Specialist Anya Sharma, with her keen eye for detail and a knack for puzzles honed during countless hours of off-duty code-breaking games, took charge of the wooden disc. She photographed it from every angle, using a portable microscope to magnify the etchings. The stylized bird, she observed, had peculiar feather patterns at its wingtips, almost like tiny distinct notches. "These aren't just decorative," she murmured, more to herself than the others. "They're too precise, too deliberate." Meanwhile, Miles and Davies focused on the series of scratches on the reverse. They tried overlaying them onto the map, rotating the disc, looking for any geographical correlation. They experimented with numerical sequences, alphabetic patterns, even basic pictograms, recalling local folklore and symbols they'd been briefed on. The initial hours yielded nothing but frustration, a growing pile of discarded theories. The sun began its slow descent, casting long dramatic shadows across the landscape, making the task even more urgent. The puppy, initially quiet, occasionally let out a soft whine, as if sensing their struggle. Then, just as morale began to wane, Anya had a breakthrough. She noticed that the position of the bird's head, slightly tilted, aligned perfectly with a known constellation visible in the night sky. The tiny notches on its wings, when cross-referenced with a local astronomical chart, corresponded to specific stars within that constellation. "It's a celestial marker," she exclaimed, her voice hushed with excitement. "A reference point. Using this, they re-examined the scratches. With the celestial reference fixed, the seemingly random lines on the reverse side began to make a chilling kind of sense. They weren't a map in the traditional geographical sense, but rather a sequence of directional indicators and distances, starting from the constellation's center point, implying a journey originating from a specific direction relative to the stars. When they plotted these vectors onto the topographical map, they led, with unnerving precision, to a remote, largely unexplored valley nestled deep within a treacherous mountain range, a place deemed too hazardous for typical patrols, rumored to be uninhabited. The revelation hit them with the force of a physical blow. This wasn't a general distress signal. It was a desperate plea from a specific, hidden civilian community. The dire situation instantly became clear. This community, isolated and likely unknown to military intelligence, was either besieged, surrounded, or specifically targeted by hostile forces. The puppy wasn't just lost. It was a final, desperate messenger, a last-ditch effort to cry for help from those who had no other voice. The urgency in the air became palpable, a heavy cloak settling over them all. The thought of civilians, isolated and vulnerable, enduring unimaginable hardship, struck a raw nerve. Their original orders had been clear: patrol the sector, maintain security, identify and neutralize enemy combatants. Their mission was tactical, focused on military objectives, not humanitarian rescue. To undertake a diversion into such a high-risk, unmapped area, based on intelligence from a puppy's collar, was beyond their mandate, fraught with immense danger, and almost certainly outside the scope of their operational directives. The moral dilemma was immediate and stark. They had stumbled upon a silent cry for help, a desperate plea from innocence. To ignore it, to simply report it and move on, felt profoundly wrong. Yet to act on it meant defying orders, risking their own lives, and potentially jeopardizing the entire mission. The weight of this newfound knowledge pressed down upon Miles, a crushing burden that tasted of both immense responsibility and agonizing uncertainty. The war had opened a door to a new kind of battlefield, one fought not with bullets, but with conscience. Sergeant Miles Corbin stood before a holographic map in the makeshift command center, his finger tracing the vague coordinates hinted at by the wooden disc. His voice, usually steady and authoritative, carried an unusual tremor of conviction as he explained the situation to Colonel Davies, a man whose career was built on cold, hard facts and unwavering adherence to protocol. Miles detailed the discovery, the puppy, the cryptic symbols, and their painstakingly derived interpretation, a hidden community in peril, likely besieged or targeted. He presented the evidence with a meticulousness born of desperation, but he could see the skepticism hardening in the colonel's eyes. "Sergeant Corbin," Colonel Davies began, his tone unyielding, "you are suggesting we reallocate resources, potentially jeopardize an ongoing operation, and commit troops based on a message deciphered from a dog collar found in a crater? Is that truly what I'm hearing?" The colonel's gaze, usually piercing, now seemed to filter Miles's words through a thick veil of disbelief. Miles felt a familiar knot tighten in his stomach. He knew how this sounded. He knew the absurdity of it, in a war where every intelligence report was cross-referenced, verified, and re-verified. Yet, the image of the puppy's trusting eyes, the desperate plea etched into the wood, was burned into his mind. He couldn't shake the feeling that this was real, that lives hung in the balance. "Sir, the deciphering team, despite their initial reservations, confirmed the patterns. It points to a civilian settlement, roughly 20 clicks west of our current perimeter, in an area we've designated as low priority due to previous sweeps. The symbols, they indicate extreme distress, a call for help that is precise in its urgency. We believe this puppy was their last, desperate attempt to reach the outside world. Miles tried to inject every ounce of his experience, every instinct honed by years of combat, into his voice. He understood the military's rigid structure, the chain of command, the necessity of verifiable intelligence. But he also understood the raw, unadulterated cry for help that transcended any official channels. Colonel Davies leaned back, his chair creaking faintly. "Sergeant, your instincts are usually sound, but this is a significant deviation. Our primary objective remains securing the northern supply routes. A rescue mission, particularly one based on such unconventional intelligence, could expose our forces to undue risk and distract from our strategic goals. I simply cannot authorize it without more concrete proof." The words hung in the air, a definitive denial, yet also a challenge. Miles felt the familiar weight of duty pressing down on him, battling against a burgeoning sense of moral imperative. He was a soldier, bound by orders, but he was also a human being. The faces of the villagers he had failed to save in past campaigns, the cries he'd been too late to answer, flashed through his mind. Those memories were a heavy anchor, dragging him towards an unofficial path. He swallowed, his throat suddenly dry. "Understood, Colonel. I respect your decision." But even as he spoke the words, his mind was already racing, formulating alternatives, contingencies, ways to skirt the edges of authorized conduct without outright insubordination. He knew the risks. A court-martial, dishonorable discharge, perhaps worse if things went sideways. But the thought of leaving that community to suffer, knowing he held a possible key to their survival, was a far heavier burden to bear. He looked at the colonel one last time, a silent plea for understanding that remained unanswered. Back with his squad, Miles gathered them around a battered map table. The puppy, now affectionately named Hope, nestled in a makeshift bed fashioned from an old blanket, watched them with bright, intelligent eyes. The men, though loyal, sensed the shift in Miles's demeanor. They knew he was wrestling with something profound. "All right, listen up," Miles began, his voice low, almost a whisper, yet carrying the undeniable authority of a leader about to make a difficult choice. "Command found our intelligence unreliable. They're not green-lighting a full-scale rescue." A collective sigh rippled through the small group. They had invested emotionally in this puzzle, in the hope of saving someone. "However," Miles continued, his gaze sweeping over each of his men, searching their faces for any sign of hesitation, "our patrol route for the next 48 hours covers the general vicinity of the suspected settlement. We'll be conducting an extended reconnaissance, a more thorough sweep of the area. We'll be prioritizing targets of opportunity, and if, by some incredible coincidence, we happen upon a situation requiring immediate intervention, we'll be prepared to act." He chose his words carefully, navigating the treacherous line between official duty and unspoken intent. He was giving them an out, an opportunity to demur, to question, but none of them did. They met his gaze with understanding, a silent pact solidifying in the tension of the room. Corporal Jensen, always the pragmatist, spoke first. "So basically, we're going hunting for bad guys, Sergeant, and if we stumble upon some good guys needing a hand, we help them out. Standard operating procedure, with a slight adjustment to the stumbling upon part, right?" A faint, almost imperceptible smile touched Miles's lips. Jensen understood. They all did. This wasn't about disobeying direct orders. It was about interpreting them with a broader, more human understanding. It was about leveraging the gray areas, pushing the boundaries without shattering them entirely. Miles pulled up the holographic map again, highlighting the extended patrol route. "This will be a high-risk operation. We'll be moving into unverified territory, potentially engaging unknown enemy forces, with limited backup. We'll be relying on our training, our instincts, and each other more than ever. But if this message is real, If there are people suffering out there because they had the courage to send a puppy as their last hope, then we have to go." He paused, letting the gravity of his words sink in. He wasn't asking for volunteers. He was stating a fact, an unwavering decision he had already made. And his squad, in their silent acceptance, confirmed their readiness to follow him, not just as soldiers, but as men bound by a deeper code. The rescue mission, unauthorized and fraught with peril, was officially on. The crisp morning air bit at their faces as Miles and his squad pushed deeper into the contested wilderness. Hope, nestled securely in a modified tactical pouch worn by Private Miller, occasionally let out a soft whimper, a small, furry compass guiding them forward. The collar, now carefully cleaned and resealed in a waterproof sleeve, was the closest thing they had to a detailed map. Its subtle, almost imperceptible markings, when observed under specific light, seemed to indicate directional shifts, changes in terrain, and even potential waypoints, a language of survival etched onto weathered leather. Their journey was a constant dance between military precision and instinctive interpretation. Miles found himself relying on senses honed by years of combat, yet also listening to an almost primal intuition, a feeling that resonated with the puppy's quiet presence. They moved with a heightened sense of awareness, each shadow a potential threat, every rustle of leaves a possible ambush. The terrain grew progressively more challenging. What started as open woodland quickly gave way to dense, almost impenetrable forest, its canopy so thick that daylight struggled to pierce through, casting the ground in perpetual twilight. Jagged rock formations, remnants of ancient geological upheavals, rose like silent sentinels, forcing them to navigate precarious ledges and narrow passes. Miles's tactical map, usually a reliable guide, became increasingly abstract. The real map was the faint scent of charcoal and damp earth that seemed to grow stronger with every step. The subtle shift in the wind's direction that carried distant, unfamiliar sounds. They were no longer simply on patrol. They were following a legend whispered by a dog, venturing into territory uncharted by their conventional intelligence. After hours of relentless trekking, a sudden, sharp crack echoed through the forest. The unmistakable sound of a dry branch snapping underfoot. Every man froze, weapons raised, eyes scanning the dense undergrowth. Miles held up a clenched fist, signaling caution and silence. The air grew heavy with anticipation. They listened, their breathing shallow, the only sound the frantic thrumming of their own heartbeats. Then, a series of muffled shouts, guttural and foreign, emerged from deeper within the woods. Miles cursed under his breath. This wasn't merely a natural barrier. It was an active defense, a clear indication that the community they sought was indeed hidden and likely guarded. He signaled for Jensen to scout ahead, a silent hand gesture indicating an arc to the left. Corporal Jensen, a shadow amongst shadows, melted into the foliage. Minutes stretched into an eternity. Then, a faint whistle, barely audible, signaled Jensen's return. He reappeared, his face grim. "Enemy patrol, Sergeant. 2 men, armed. Looks like they're guarding an access point, a narrow ravine further in. They've got a fortified position." Hope, sensing the shift in mood, whimpered again, a low, anxious sound. Miles stroked its head, a silent promise. This was the confrontation they had anticipated, the real obstacle that had made command skeptical. They weren't just looking for a lost community. They were going to have to fight their way to them. Miles quickly formulated a plan. A direct assault on the fortified position was too risky, potentially alerting a larger force and endangering the very people they were trying to rescue. They needed a diversion, a way to bypass the sentries without escalating the situation into a full-blown firefight if possible. He split the squad into 2 smaller teams. One, led by himself and Miller, would attempt a flanking maneuver through a treacherous, water-filled gully Jensen had spotted. The other, led by Jensen, would create a carefully orchestrated distraction, drawing the guards' attention away from the gully. Success depended on precision, speed, and absolute silence from Miles's team. The flanking maneuver was arduous. The gully was deeper and steeper than anticipated, filled with icy, stagnant water that seeped into their boots and gnawed at their resolve. Every step was a battle against the slick mud and concealed roots. Miles led the way, his focus entirely on the path ahead, his mind a whirlwind of calculations and contingencies. Miller followed closely, meticulously shielding Hope from the biting cold and damp. The sounds of Jensen's diversion, a sudden burst of simulated small arms fire, carefully aimed at a distant rock face, finally cut through the silence, drawing the enemy guard's attention. It was their window. Miles and his team scaled the final embankment, emerging silently behind the fortified position. The two guards, their backs to them, were still focused on the decoy, their voices raised in agitated discussion. This was not about killing, it was about securing the path. With swift, practiced movements, Miles and Miller disarmed and neutralized the guards, rendering them unconscious without a single shot fired. The path ahead was finally clear. Beyond the ravine, hidden by a natural rock overhang and deliberately camouflaged foliage, lay the entrance to a network of caves. A thin wisp of smoke curled upwards from a barely visible crevice. It was the scent of wood smoke, of human habitation, that confirmed their success. As they cautiously approached the entrance, a faint, almost melodic chanting became audible, a mournful harmony carried on the damp air. They had found it. The hidden community, a beacon of vulnerability and distress, just as the caller had foretold. Miles felt a profound mix of relief and renewed urgency. He looked down at Hope, who now seemed to sense their arrival, her tail giving a tentative wag. The small, whimpering puppy, a creature of pure innocence, had led them through a gauntlet of doubt, danger, and moral quandary to this very spot. The message, once cryptic, was now screaming its truth. The people inside these caves, unseen but acutely felt, were real, and they were waiting. The weight of their original orders, once a distant memory, now seemed utterly irrelevant in the face of this profound discovery. Their purpose had been redefined, not by command, but by the silent plea of a tiny, courageous creature. The journey through the treacherous terrain tested every fiber of their being. Miles led his squad with a renewed sense of purpose, Hope trotting faithfully beside him, its little paws navigating rocks and roots with surprising agility. The initial days were a blur of cautious movement, heightened patrols, and silent communication. They were ghosts in a land of shadows, always aware that one wrong step could betray their unauthorized mission. The cryptic symbols on the collar, now etched into Miles's memory, served as their compass, pointing them deeper into what maps designated as uncharted territory. But what their instincts screamed was a forgotten passage. Each sunrise brought a chill, not just from the morning air, but from the looming unknown that lay ahead. Their first true confrontation exploded without warning. A small, concealed outpost, camouflaged perfectly into the rocky outcrop, opened fire as Jensen, ever vigilant, spotted a glint of sunlight on a rifle barrel. Miles reacted instantly, shouting commands as his men dove for cover, returning precision fire. The skirmish was fierce, brief, and brutal. The enemy, clearly surprised by their unexpected presence, fought with a desperate ferocity, but the Canadians' training and superior coordination quickly overwhelmed them. One moment, the air was thick with the scent of gunpowder and the shouts of battle. The next, an eerie silence descended, broken only by the settling dust and the ragged breaths of his men. 2 enemy combatants lay still, confirming the danger was indeed real and ever-present. Hope, surprisingly, had remained calm during the exchange, huddled close to Miles's leg, a silent testament to its unyielding trust. This wasn't just a patrol anymore, it was a righteous path, paved with courage and a burgeoning sense of justice. Wounded, but not broken, they pressed on. The coordinates, painstakingly pieced together from the collar's fragmented clues and local folklore, led them through a narrow canyon, its walls rising ominously on either side. It was there, nestled against the canyon's furthest wall, almost swallowed by the shadows, that they found it, the hidden community. It wasn't a village in the traditional sense, but a makeshift settlement of tents and crude shelters, a testament to resilience born of necessity. Figures, skeletal and wary, emerged from the shadows, their eyes wide with disbelief and a flicker of hope. The children, thin and undernourished, peered out from behind their mothers, their faces smudged with dirt and fear. The message on the collar, those desperate, silent pleas, had been accurate. The community was vulnerable, besieged by an unseen enemy, living on the brink of survival. Miles felt a profound weight lift from his shoulders even as a new one settled in its place. They had found them. Now, they had to secure them. His training kicked in, a lifetime of discipline overriding the lingering fatigue. He issued orders, concise and clear, establishing a perimeter, assessing the immediate needs. Corporal Jensen and Private Miller began distributing their emergency rations and water, the simple act bringing tears to the eyes of the community elders. The initial suspicion in the villagers' eyes slowly gave way to a fragile trust as they watched the soldiers work with quiet efficiency and unexpected kindness. The next few days blurred into an intense cycle of defense and aid. Miles and his squad fortified the makeshift shelters, established watch points, and most crucially, cleared the immediate surrounding area of any lingering threats. They encountered more enemy patrols, each engagement a stark reminder of the constant danger that had terrorized these people for so long. But with the Canadian soldiers now standing guard, the villagers found a newfound courage. They brought out hidden reserves of food, offered what little medical supplies they possessed, and shared crucial intelligence about the enemy's movements. This was no longer just a rescue mission. It had transformed into a partnership, a small pocket of humanity fighting back against overwhelming odds. Miles made contact with command, deliberately vague about the specifics of their operation, reporting an unexpected encounter with a significant civilian population in distress, and requesting immediate humanitarian aid and extraction support. He omitted the part about the puppy, the unauthorized journey, and the deciphered collar. To his surprise, perhaps due to the sheer urgency in his voice or the weight of the evidence he provided, command responded swiftly. Within 48 hours, a medical team and additional security detachments were en route, their arrival a beacon of hope for both the soldiers and the villagers. The day of the evacuation was filled with emotions. The villagers, once isolated and fearful, boarded the transport helicopters, their faces etched with gratitude. Miles watched them go, a quiet satisfaction settling deep within him. They had done it. They had rewritten their orders not by defiance, but by an unwavering commitment to a higher moral code. Hope, the little puppy whose whimper had set this entire chain of events in motion, stood beside him, its tail wagging gently, a living embodiment of the unexpected good that can emerge from the darkest, most desperate corners of the world. The puppy's journey, from an abandoned crater to the catalyst for a daring rescue, was a testament to the belief that even the smallest spark of life can ignite profound change. As the last helicopter ascended, its rotors kicking up a swirling cloud of dust, Miles turned to his squad. They were tired, bruised, but their eyes held a light that hadn't been there before. This mission, born of a whimpering animal and a cryptic collar, had left an indelible mark on each of them. It wasn't about medals or commendations. It was about the profound, undeniable humanity they had rediscovered in themselves. The success of this mission, sparked by that tiny abandoned creature, brought a profound, if temporary, sense of peace and purpose to Miles and his men. Hope, now an unofficial mascot, trotted over and nuzzled Miles's hand, its warm presence a constant reminder of the unexpected good that can emerge from the darkest places. If this story touched your heart, give this video a like and share it with someone who needs to hear it. And don't forget to subscribe for more remarkable true stories, and click on the next video for another incredible tale of courage and discovery.